Hello and welcome to episode 6, I believe, of my childhood memories growing up in the late 60s and the 1970s. This episode I thought I would talk about my memories of doctors, dentist, crisp, which is potato chips to you Americans, and comics, like the funnies as the Americans would say. What ones we could buy and what ones I remember. So let's begin. Let's talk first about doctors. Now, in England you had a general practitioner, a GP, which had to be in your local area, and your family would have been with them all the time they'd been in the area. You all had the same doctor. And our doctor, I believe he was somewhere else first, but I only know when he moved to a general practice. And this is a health centre with several different doctors in, and you would go there and see the doctor in his room in the general practice. Now, as I say, I think he worked independently before, I'm not sure, but I'm pretty sure as well his father was a doctor. But I'll stick with my memories, and his name was Dr. Grice, and he was a really lovely, to me, an old doctor. And the thing was, in those days, if as a child you were too ill to come in, he would do home visits, and you didn't pay for that. This was the National Health, so you didn't pay for home visits, but it had to be a reason you couldn't come in, such as you might be contagious or as a child too ill to bring into the surgery and other people would catch it. So Dr. Grice was a really lovely doctor, and I do remember he had that big old-fashioned doctor's bag. I believe they're called a Gladstone bag. He had that, and he was really nice. And when he wasn't available, his deputy doctor was Dr. Hayward, and I remember him as well. He was a bigger man, and again he seemed quite nice. And for many years, until I left home as an adult, this was the place I went to see the doctor. And I can't remember if he was always the doctor there or I saw someone else in my later years there, because I didn't go that often. And the last time I recall having a doctor come, and it had to be a home visit, was we had been to a dance competition, and I was in my teenage years, late teenage years. And the next day, I think it was, my whole leg had swollen up, and I'm not joking when I say 3 times the thickness of my leg. It suddenly had flared up. That's why I think it was overnight, and I woke up and it was 3 times as big. And my dad, it was always my dad phoned the doctors. He phoned up and they said, don't let her come to the surgery or move around. It might be a hemorrhage or blood clot. She's not to move. Keep her on the sofa and we will come. And that was the last time I had a home visit from a doctor. And of course I had all the child ailments that English children had. Chicken pox, measles. Did I get measles? All the sort of things that children would get. And you had vaccinations against them. And I had the old-fashioned version of one of the ways you had injections. You would either have it, some of them weren't injected to you, you had them neat on a spoon, what would be injected normally. I don't know the reason for that, but one always came in a sugar lump, a cube of sugar, and that was why English children had one of their inoculations. I didn't at school have, I get mixed up what things were for what, but there was one you had in senior school, and you had to have a test first at school. You always had this one at school, and it was some contraption it had like triangular 3 points on it, and they would do it like an injection, but it was to test to see if it wasn't going to cause you any harm, this injection. It's something only girls had. Boys didn't get this, so it must be something the girls only got, and the girls had to have it. And they would line you up at senior school because everyone had to have it done, so they did it in senior school. You didn't go to your doctors. And this punch thing did 3, whether it was 3 different things, but it was 3 marks. And if you see a lot of English girls, it was so severe that they still have a mark on their arm from it. Usually their left arm, because they didn't let you use your writing arm to have this test. And my mother decided I was not to have it because she'd heard it was so dangerous. This is why they have to give you the test first. That she said I was not to have it, and wrote a very severe letter to the school that obviously if they ignored the letter, or oh we forgot, and she told me you must not have it. Whatever they say, get them to ring home, you are not to have it. And all my friends were saying, you have to have it. You can't say, oh, I don't want it. You have to have it. And I remember everyone being called out, and I was like, what do I do? Do I just not go, or do I line up and not there? And they were calling you out in alphabetical order in this queue outside the like nurse's office, I suppose you'd call it, or sick room. And when it got to me, they called me out, and I said, the office has a letter to say I'm not to do it. I wouldn't go in the room. I thought once I'm in there, and I don't know, I can't remember, but I didn't have it in the end. And then some girls' arms really flared up, and they said, well, they can't now have the injection, and I didn't even get that far. So that's my memories of doctors. And now let's talk about dentist. Now the Americans will go crazy with this, because Americans go to the dentist very regularly. English people tend only to go to the dentist if they've got a problem wrong with their teeth, such as doctors. Some people go for regular health checks, particularly if you're older. English people mostly only go to doctors if they've got something wrong. So not preventative are English dentists. Maybe different these days, who knows. But in the 60s and 70s, and even before, you didn't go to a dentist unless you had a problem. And I don't remember the youngest age I went to a dentist. I'm going to guess junior school, like middle school. And I can't remember if I had pain in my teeth or what, but I went to a dentist. My dad, it always was my dad. If you look back at a previous episode, you'll see no matter what happened to me, my dad looked after me, and my mum stayed away. And my dad had to take time off work. My mum didn't work, but my dad took time off work and took me to the dentist. Now, to have a tooth taken out in those days, I don't think you even got an injection, whereas now it's an injection to numb and then take the teeth out. Whether it was just because children, they didn't want moving around or shouting out, but you always got gas. So you had a mask with gas and you were completely out. And I think this is why I always say I would prefer any operation to be completely out. Get on with it. I'll wake up, it's done. I think it stems from that, not knowing where I've heard other people talk about all dentists and you get this injection and the pain and so on and so forth. So it was always gas. Now, you may know I get car sick, and after this point in my life, if I've had operations, they always have trouble bringing me round after an operation. So there's something there. But with this gas, every time I had gas at the dentist, I would come home and be violently ill, throwing up, projectile vomiting multiple times. You couldn't go back to school after going to the dentist with me. I would be laying on a sofa and I would be physically sick for hours and hours afterwards. But that was the only way the dentist worked. So I don't know how many times I went to the dentist. Some of these things stick in your mind and you feel like it was many times, but it probably wasn't that bad. I didn't have terrible teeth. So I went on a few occasions, let's say a few occasions over the years, and I always had gas. That's all they did. So gas. And every time my mum knew I was going to be violently sick. And she was a bit concerned that obviously I might not then want to go to the dentist if I needed to, because I knew I was going to be really ill afterwards. So she made it a treat, a treat. When I came back from the dentist, she would, and this is always, go round the corner shop. There was a shop round the corner, a newsagent where you can buy sweets and comics and bits and pieces, and she would always buy me a big plain, I guess it's an art book really, like plain pages, a really big like drawing pad. And she would always buy, you could get stickers, not stickers like you get today, peel off and stick on. They were coloured paper, shapes pre-cut out, just small, like little circles, triangles. I remember there was ones that looked like bluebells, stars maybe, that kind of thing. And she would buy them in a little packet like that, and she would bring me those, and you lick and stick, and you made pictures out of them, but obviously I was feeling nauseous. So my dad had, for envelopes, you had like think of a very thin rolling pin, and it went round in a little silver tray. It was fixed in there, and it went round, and you could wet things, so you rolled envelopes to stick envelopes down, because those were the days you didn't have gummed or sticky envelopes. You had to lick and stick. So she would always buy me these shapes, and she thought it would take my mind to sort of perch up and then make pictures rather than just reading or something. Would have made me maybe a bit more nauseous. As I say, I used to get car sick. I could never read or look at a book in a car. So she always did that. And I remember the last time that she did it, she came back and she got these coloured stickers, but she said, oh, there's these new things. And they were the same cut-out shapes, but they were silver and gold stars. So that I remember. And as I say, always had the next day off. And that is my memories of dentist. But the thing I remember more is that, again, time span as a child, I don't know how long after this all was, that actual dentist, we'll be careful with disclaimers here, that actual dentist got into trouble and closed down for using more than the amount of gas they should be using. And I don't know if they actually had anyone die. I think they did, but disclaimer, I don't remember. And there was consequences, and that dentist closed down. So do you think I didn't have a problem with the gas? I was just having the wrong amount. Interesting. And then something else, when I was sick as a child, my mum would get me a comic. Now, Americans call those, I think, the funnies, like a little pamphlet that you bought as a child, child magazine with funnies in, or cartoon things in, comics. And so I got to thinking, what comics did we get? Now, there was a time when my mum bought them when we were very little and would read them to us at night. I think the very first comic I remember, and the stories often continued, I think it was called Jack and Jill. I seem to recall that being the name. And there would be lots of different stories. You've all probably heard of Beano and things like that. It would be lots of different stories in this magazine. Then I think Pippin. Pippin was one we had for a long time. And if I remember rightly, Pippin was actually from a children's programme called Pogle's Wood. And there was Mr. and Mrs. Pogle, their son, who was kind of like I would say he was an elf boy or not. He didn't have pointy ears. But they lived in a tree in the wood, like they had a door in the tree. And that was Pippin. And then he had like a squirrel type friend. He wasn't quite a squirrel, but he looked squirrely. And that was Tog. So if I remember rightly, the Pippin comic had all cartoons of the children's programmes in. And we seem to have had that for a long time. I don't know when my mum stopped buying regular comics for us. Maybe when she stopped reading to us in bed, or maybe the cost went up, or she was getting fed up with just keep buying them and what to do with them. And I've talked before, I think the last episode, where I said we used to cut pictures up and put them into scrapbooks and then give them to the children's hospital. So we got rid of a lot like that. But at some point she stopped buying them. If we were on holiday, she might buy us a comic, or you could often get, like, I don't know how to describe it, like a very small children's magazine like that. And that would have stories and that in. So we'd sometimes have that on holiday. But as I say, if we were ill or something like that, she'd go and buy us a comic. And one that she would buy then, one that was new out, was Twinkle. Now, I think Twinkle still exists. When I was a dance teacher, I remember one of my girls, you could send up pictures of yourself and say a bit about you. And she was actually in the Twinkle comic, so I remember that. And then as I got older, I got into more older girl comics. And they were all girls' names, such as Bunty, Judy, Debbie. Let me know in the comments below any of those ones or any other comics or magazines you were into, either as a child or when you got older. And I did go through a little phase of like boy type comics, like the Beano. And I remember one I really liked was Whizzer and Chips. So look that one up. And these are more the Dennis the Menace type of comic that you may be more familiar with, such as the Beano and Dandy. And then, of course, teenage years, you start looking at more older type magazines. Now, one I do remember, because I've always been interested in following sort of TV type stories, which is why I like the Pippin that I talked about. One was called Look In. And this was really a promotion for none of the BBC TV channels, but ITV, and in England you had different regions of ITV, so whichever part of England you were in, you had a different ITV station, TV channel, and that would always list what was on. I think it was just Friday, Saturday, Sunday. It might have been all week, I can't remember, but they didn't put every single programme down. They only put what would interest children. And then the magazine, it was more a cross between a comic and a magazine then, that would have the stories in it of different TV programmes. So it would take the characters of television programmes and make up new and extra stories, such as Catweasel. I wonder if you know Catweasel. So they were in that. And then, as I say, I got into older teenage magazines. Probably the first one I saw of proper teenage magazines rather than comics was Jackie. Again, a girl's name. But this was aimed at much older teenagers. I'm going to say they really were aiming at 15, 16 plus. But of course, you always get younger girls reading it. And it would have little makeup tips. It would have a page which was quite new to me of advice column, but it would be, I'm afraid to have sex the first time with my boyfriend, hence why it was a little bit, I think it was the first children's teenage magazine that did that kind of thing. If I remember rightly, Janet Street Porter was something connected with that. I may be wrong, but definitely people who were known later on in time. And it would be, as I say, makeup advice and different hairstyles. There would be some stories in there, but more now they would be full printed out stories, so you'd read it more like a book rather than cartoony type comic strips now. And pop stars, there would be pop stars in it, all that kind of thing. And how to deal with period problems and all those kind of things. And as I say, I think I was probably about 11 because I'd gone to senior school or high school, and that's when I first came across it. I think a friend had it, or maybe my big sister had it, and it was all these things. I'm sure my mother wouldn't have liked me really reading about some of these things. It was quite sexual, a lot of it, sex comments and how do you have sex without it hurting, which in those days was a little bit forward for the age group to be reading about. I also had another magazine after that called Fab 208, and that was a radio station, and I think it was a little bit too old for me, that one, because it was more chit chat about not just fan scene of pop stars, but other things that I probably didn't read all of it. That was just us trying to find another magazine to suit myself. And then I had one, Disco 45. Now this was 99% of it was song words to the pop songs, but they would have a couple of pages of features about a pop group and some pictures in there of pop groups as well. So I had that. My favourite one that I stuck with for a long time was Newly Out. I'm going to say I was probably about 14 or 15 when it came out. It's a brand new magazine, and it was called My Guy. And it was all the things of Jackie but toned down. It was much more, it was a new concept, and the cartoon strips, if you like, the storyboards were actual real photographs of real people in black and white, but real pictures, and they would have speech bubbles. And my friend said to me, my cousin is on this new magazine. This is before I saw the magazine, and this is how I got to know the magazine. He works there as a photographer on this new magazine, and he wants to take pictures of me and some of my friends. Now, we didn't know this concept of this magazine at this point. So she said, we've got to meet somewhere at a certain time. And I went home and I said to my mum, I can be in a magazine. She said it's her cousin doing it, and she wants some of her friends to come. And of course, my mum assumed it was modelling. She didn't know about this picture board, and nor did we at this point. And she thought it was just taking pictures of young girls and putting in this magazine, which sounds quite irresponsible. So she said, no, you're not doing it. I'll not do that. And a couple of my friends did go. And then a few weeks later, this magazine came out, My Guy, and I explained what it looks like. And all my friends were in it with all speech bubbles. And they had to stand there like, oh, and the speech bubble, and carry shopping bags. And they talk about, let's see what you bought, that kind of thing. It was a story, and all my friends were in it, and I wasn't. But that's how I learnt about the My Guy magazine. And then around the 70s, late 70s, Fame became very popular. So I started buying, it was like, they're just small magazines, and you collected them in sets, and it was all about the show and the behind the scenes. So I got the Fame magazines. They were really good. And also like that, I bought The Professionals, which was a TV programme with Martin Shawrin, who I absolutely loved. So fanzine type magazines, and again that came as quite a small little booklet, quite thick though. I think they were monthly rather than weekly, I'm not sure. And talking of monthly magazines, you would then collect things, and it would be one out every week or every couple of weeks. And I collected one on all the musicals, and they came free each time with a CD of all the music of that musical. So there were collector type magazines, and the booklet told you all about that musical, the story of it and other things. The only other magazine I can really remember that, again, I had much later in time, probably after all these ones I've just said, was Mad magazine. Now I'm sure many of you know Mad magazine. It is funny, and the funniest bit that I liked in there was it Spy v Spy. I think you can see some of those on YouTube. They've been made into cartoons. Spy v Spy was very good. And of course we all remember the back page. Inside the back page it would say something, and you'd fold it in a very special way, fold it in, and it would produce another picture. And that was awesome. They were absolutely amazing. You couldn't tell what the final picture would be when you folded it up. If you don't know Mad magazine, I'm sure you can find some out there. Look in auctions or comic sales, or as I say, go on YouTube, maybe someone's showing you them there. They were absolutely awesome. I really enjoyed those, and they were always, each edition was normally 2 or 3 different films or TV takeoffs, having a laugh at programs or films. Very good. Do try and take a look at those as well. And of course I also collected German magazines when I was learning German, and when I belonged to the Brownies, which was before Guides, you had a Brownie magazine. So now I'm going to talk to you about crisp flavours I remember. That's potato chips for the Americans. And I love that the 70s particularly, they started to bring out so many flavours. They'd started off just being plain crisp, and you used to get a blue salt and shake bag that you could shake in. Ready salted was the plain crisp that I detested. Then you got salt and vinegar flavour, cheese and onion, and they were the main ones for a long time. These are just your basic plain type crisps, not your fancy type shapes and that. Then you got prawn cocktail, which I love to this day. That's probably one of my most favourites. Smoky bacon, I didn't like that. Bovril, I didn't like that. Then roasted chicken came out. That was very nice. And then they started to bring out some really funky flavours. Sausage and tomato. I'm not a great lover of tomatoes, but that was really nice. Tomato ketchup flavour. Cheese and chive. Beef. Turkey and stuffing. Now that would only come out at Christmas time, but that was worth getting. And then they brought out curry and paprika and some other weird flavours. Every so many years they do a competition for you to make up a new flavour of crisp. But of course now there's many different types of crisp. Chipsticks, you've got the really skinny type ones, did like those, and really thick nice ones. Hula hoops, knick-knacks, the nice and spicy flavour. Discos. The Monster Munch, the pickled onion was the best flavour of those. Cheese balls and cheese puffs. Pringles, they were very modern, and I don't like those. The Vampire and Haunted House series, you got fangs and bone shaped crisp, but they were good. Cheeselets, Twiglets, I detest Twiglets. And Frazzles and Space Invader crisp. Monster Munch, Tell me in the comments any you remember, and I'll see you again on episode 7. Thanks for watching. Tell me your memories below. Hit that thumbs up, and I'll see you next time.